In the Grand Palace of Madrid, a king was dying. And as he faded, the Spanish Empire, once a titan that spanned the globe, was crumbling right alongside him. But the legacy of King Ferdinand VII wasn't just about lost continents and a shrinking empire. It was about a secret. A shocking, pathological cruelty so absolute that it terrified his own family and came to symbolize a monarchy rotten to its core. This is the story of how one king's monstrous appetite for power, his deep-seated paranoia, and his profound betrayals brought an entire empire to its knees. He was first known as El Deseado, the Desired One. By the end, they only knew him as El Rey Felón, the Felon King. So, what makes a monarch that hated? While lurid rumors of sexual depravity and a monstrous physique have swirled for centuries, the verifiable truth of his reign is, in many ways, far more disturbing. This isn't just a tale of personal vice. It's a story about the ultimate perversion, the absolute corruption of power. So how did he become this monster? Well, it all started when he was a boy. Born in 1784, Prince Ferdinand grew up in a palace simmering with dysfunction. His father, King Charles IV, was a weak and indecisive ruler, way more interested in his hunting dogs and clock collection than, governing. The real power belonged to his mother, Queen Maria Luisa, and her famously powerful lover, Prime Minister Manuel Godoy. Ferdinand was shut out of all government affairs, left to stew in his own resentment. He spent his youth watching his mother's favorite run the country, while his father just looked the other way. This daily humiliation fed a deep paranoia and a venomous hatred for the people he thought were stealing his birthright. His first political lessons weren't about statesmanship. They were about court gossip and family betrayal. And he didn't wait long to use what he'd learned. As Napoleon Bonaparte's shadow fell across Europe, Ferdinand saw his chance. In 1707, he was caught red-handed, plotting against his own father to seize the throne with Napoleon's help. He was arrested and pathetically begged for forgiveness, but the damage was done. Just months later, a popular riot against Godoy forced his father to abdicate. Ferdinand, at last, had the crown. His victory, however, lasted about 5 minutes. He had turned to Napoleon for help, thinking the French emperor would have his back. Big mistake. Napoleon summoned both Ferdinand and his father to the French city of Bayonne, and in a masterclass of humiliation, forced them both to abdicate. Just like that, he handed the Spanish throne to his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte. Ferdinand, the so-called king, was packed off to a cushy prison in a French chateau, where he'd spend the next 6 years fuming. And this is where the story gets really weird. While Ferdinand was living a pretty comfortable life in exile, he even wrote groveling letters to Napoleon, the guy who'd stolen his kingdom. His name back in Spain was being turned into something sacred. For the Spanish people, who rose up in a brutal, bloody war against the French invaders, Ferdinand became the symbol of everything they were fighting for. He wasn't the treacherous son or the humiliated puppet. He was El Deseado, the Desired One. For 6 long years, peasants, priests, and soldiers fought and died in his name. Juntas, or ruling councils, popped up all over Spain and its American colonies, all claiming to govern for their absent king. In the city of Cadiz, a group of liberal thinkers, inspired by the ideals of revolution, gathered to write a new future for Spain. In 1812, they produced one of the most progressive constitutions in European history. This thing was revolutionary. It created a constitutional monarchy, declared that the nation, not the king, was sovereign, got rid of feudalism, and even guaranteed freedom of the press. It was a beacon of hope, a modern nation forged in the fires of war, all just waiting for its king to come home. They could not have been more wrong about the man they were waiting for. In December 1813, a defeated Napoleon finally agreed to release Ferdinand and recognize him as King of Spain. When he returned in March 1814, the country went wild. Crowds cheered, delirious with joy. Their desired king was back. The liberals who wrote the Constitution expected him to sign it and lead Spain into a new, enlightened age. Ferdinand had other plans. Egged on by conservative nobles in the church, he saw the Constitution not as a gift, but as an insult, a piece of paper that dared to limit his God-given absolute power. On May 4th, 1814, he showed his true colors. He issued a decree declaring the Constitution of 1812 and everything the liberals had worked for completely null and void. But it wasn't just a repeal, it was a purge. He immediately had the liberal leaders arrested, the very men who had fought to put him back on the throne. He unleashed a wave of brutal repression, jailing and exiling anyone with liberal ideas. To complete his trip back to the Dark Ages, he even brought back the Spanish Inquisition. While it wasn't the all-powerful terror of centuries past, it was the ultimate symbol of his war on progress. A tool to enforce loyalty and hunt down dissenters. This was Ferdinand's great betrayal. The desired king had become the Felon King, and his reign of terror was just getting started. The next 6 years proved that Ferdinand wasn't just cruel, he was also spectacularly incompetent. This period, known as the Sexenio Absolutista, was a total catastrophe for Spain. He ruled like a paranoid despot, driven by nothing but vengeance. He cracked down on universities, purging them of liberal thinkers, and smothered the free press. His government was a cesspool of corruption, run by a clique of his buddies who were as unqualified as they were cruel. And while Ferdinand was busy hunting down imaginary traitors, his empire was literally dissolving. The Spanish-American colonies had started their own independence movements while he was gone. And seeing this tyrant back on the throne, they saw no reason to stop. One by one, they broke away. Ferdinand's attempts to reconquer them were pathetic. In 1820, he managed to scrape together an army to send to the Americas. But the troops, completely disgusted with his rule, mutinied and marched on Madrid instead. This revolt forced Ferdinand to restore the Constitution, kicking off a brief 3-year liberal period. But Ferdinand was just biding his time. He secretly conspired with other European monarchies, and in 1823, a French army invaded Spain to put him back in absolute power. His second restoration was followed by another, even bloodier wave of revenge against the liberals, a period so brutal it's remembered as the ominous decade. By the time he was done, Spain had lost nearly all of its American empire, the treasury was bankrupt, and the nation was split into bitter factions that would haunt it for a century. It's no surprise that a guy this monstrous politically would have some pretty monstrous rumors swirling about his personal life. For centuries, sensational stories have circulated, tales of extreme sadism, of him abusing his 4 wives, and of a grotesque physical abnormality, a massive genital that supposedly required special pillows for him to perform his dynastic duty. These stories paint a picture of a man who wasn't just a political tyrant, but a sexual predator and a physical freak. But here's the thing. As wild as these stories are, there is no credible historical evidence to back them up. Mainstream historians largely agree they were political propaganda. I mean, what's a better way to delegitimize a king than to attack his masculinity and paint him as a literal monster? But honestly, getting bogged down in these juicy, unproven rumors kind of misses the point. The documented, verifiable truth is more than damning enough. The true perversion of Ferdinand VII wasn't what he might have done in the royal bedroom. It was what he did to his country. His perversion was a pathological lust for absolute, unquestioned power. It was a sadistic political cruelty that took actual pleasure in persecuting the very people who had once called him their savior. It was a grotesque betrayal of the millions who had bled for him. No rumor can possibly exaggerate that depravity. But Ferdinand wasn't done wrecking his country just yet. He had one last parting gift of pure chaos to leave behind. After 4 marriages, he had failed to produce a male heir. His only surviving children were 2 daughters from his 4th wife. According to the Salic law that Spain had used since the 1700s, women couldn't inherit the throne. This meant his successor should have been his younger brother, Don Carlos. But Ferdinand, in a final act of pure selfishness, couldn't stand the thought of his brother taking his crown. In 1830, he issued a decree setting aside the law, allowing his infant daughter, Isabella, to become queen. He didn't do this because he was some secret progressive feminist. He did it purely so his own direct bloodline would stay on the throne. The moment he died in 1833, this final selfish act tore the country apart. Supporters of his brother, known as the Carlists, refused to accept a queen. They rose in rebellion, igniting the First Carlist War, a brutal civil war that lasted 7 years and spawned more conflicts for decades to come. Ferdinand's very last act on earth was to guarantee generations of suffering for his people. Ferdinand VII's reign is a chilling reminder that a ruler's personal flaws, their paranoia, their cruelty, their selfishness, can become a nation's curse. There are so many other twisted monarchs whose stories are just as dark. If you're fascinated by the intersection of power and depravity, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let us know in the comments, which monarch's dark history should we uncover next? So what's the final verdict on Ferdinand VII? He inherited a global empire and left behind a broken, bankrupt nation on the verge of perpetual civil war. He was called the Desired One, and he answered that hope with a vindictiveness that shocked a continent. While the title, the Most Perverted King, might conjure images of some kind of bedroom monster, his real, documented perversion was his complete and utter corruption of the sacred trust between a ruler and his people. He didn't just neglect his kingdom, he actively savaged it. He tore up its hopes, persecuted its heroes, and salted its earth for the future. He stands as one of history's most potent warnings, that the most monstrous perversion of all is the abuse of absolute power.